Hello and welcome to Gameday. On our episode today, we're going to have a very special guest, Michael Sutherland. Thank you for coming and joining us. Michael started his career on the VC world, working on different technology companies and with a focus on developing new technologies. And he transitioned to the sport world in one of the biggest brands in football, which is Real Madrid, where he led the digital transformation of the club. So, Michael, thank you for taking the time and coming here.
Great to be here.
Take us a little bit just for the audience and the people that don't know you. Can you take us through your career and how you transition from the VC technology world into sports and how that journey has been?
It is a bit of an odd turn of events if you're sort of looking at Silicon Valley and then finishing up in the world of sports. I spent a lot of my career working in kind of emerging technologies. So what do I mean by emerging technologies? They're really looking at the next generation of technologies. And what I found really exciting and really what I was passionate about was understanding like, where is the market? Where's technology going that we can create products that are going to actually really bring value and to consumers. So I spent some of my time, for example, at HP, where we were part of what I would usually refer to as kind of a skunkworks group. And by that, I mean, within HP, within the bigger company of HP, we were sort of a small group that was kind of vertically integrated. We did everything from R&D, innovation, concept, all the way to go to market and delivering products into the market. But those products were really looking at like what's the next generation of computing interfaces. So for example, we were looking at things like natural language interfaces, conversational interfaces, the idea of talking to technology in order to interact with it, which now has all of a sudden become like the thing. And of course, at that time, we didn't know about this current generation of AI. But what I was always passionate about was like, how can we create products? How can we create businesses that are at that sort of intersection of looking towards the future, but are really just bringing real value and not just a technology play. And so I spent a lot of my time doing that. So I've been in startups, I've done some angel investing, I've done some I've been in sort of venture capital partnerships, venture capital partner, and in all sorts of different areas of Silicon Valley, and always kind of in that sort of looking towards the future, which I think probably just stems from like my love of science fiction and always being kind of obsessed with the future. But I mean, how did that end up coming into sport? Well, I basically my career has kind of been defined by, I guess, like leaps of faith in a sense, taking chances that may otherwise seem a little bit crazy. And so it's certainly not the first time in my career that I've kind of just decided to try something else. And so in this case, what happened was I was consulting. I'd left HP, I'd moved back to Europe, and I was starting a consulting practice. I was starting to bring on clients. And through some previous connections that had happened some years prior while I was in the US, I was in touch with Real Madrid. And at the time, working in sports was sort of the furthest thing that I'd ever really imagined. But the opportunity came up to help them with like a particular problem. And that was sort of a 3-month engagement where I had a chance to really get under the hood, really understand like how the business worked. It was kind of it was a bit of my first foray into the world of sort of sports business. And it was a real eye-opener for me because it allowed me to kind of take a lot of the lessons, a lot of the learnings, a lot of the experience from my time in Silicon Valley, where, working in very large organizations, very big brands, very complex structures, but also very small startup-like ventures as well. Mm-hmm. And sort of see where some of the areas that I could potentially help them. And so that turned into kind of putting together for them kind of a strategic playbook around what a transformation for the commercial side of the organization could looking at everything from brand strategy, brand communication to technology infrastructure, digital product development, digital roadmaps, across a kind of a sort of a broad array of different aspects, with the objective of how do we grow commercial revenues beyond where they are today. And then that ultimately turned into the creation of this role of Chief Transformation Officer, which I've ended up going to lead over the last 4.5 years.
Yeah, I think coming from your technology background, you must have been very surprised. And I think that this is one of the main challenges of the industry today, is that the level of technology and digitalization in general in the industry, it's quite low. The adoption of new technologies in general is quite low. It has speed up in the last few years, but
I would challenge that a little bit. I think that there is a perception that in the world of sports, the technology adoption's low. I think you have to break that down. It's a little bit of a more nuanced conversation than that. I think there are absolutely technologies embraced in many aspects of the world of sports. And again, it also depends on which sports you're talking about, which parts of that business you're looking at. Different sports have engaged technology in different ways from a sports performance standpoint. But from my perspective, looking more at the commercial side of the business, what I think you end up having is you've got a very difficult environment to innovate, to develop new technology. And that's not necessarily due to a lack of understanding or a lack of knowledge or a lack of talent. It's often just due to the fact that the organization of, say, for example, a football club is not really conducive to fostering that culture around commercial innovation. Because, of course, a lot of the focus is on the sports teams. It's on the basketball team, the football team. It's about allocating capital to those resources, building out your team. Because what your fans are looking for is they want you to win trophies. They want you to win matches. They don't necessarily want to hear about what your e-commerce strategy is. But, of course, all of those areas of the business have become more and more and more important as the business of sport has grown over the last 20 years.
Yeah, and especially how it has diversified from different revenue sources. Like
Absolutely.
before, it was solely maybe the ticketing or the media rights, but now it's what you were mentioning: e-commerce, the commercial side, media, ticketing, and how you take all this into consideration. Because obviously, what you said, like the most effective strategy is to win on the pitch, but in sports, you're not always winning. So considering this environment and what you have mentioned, what were the pillars of your transformation when you were at Real Madrid?
Well, so one of the things was really about how do we bring everyone along on this journey. So like I mentioned, I put together a strategic playbook and during the consulting period, and I kind of used that as a guide throughout, but we never specifically ran our strategy based on that piece of work that I'd done during the consulting. Because at the end of the day, what I really wanted to do was create an environment and drive a vision that everyone could be bought into. So actually what we did was, and this was during the pandemic, because I arrived in 2019 and very shortly after, sort of middle end of 2019, and very shortly after we hit the pandemic. And so if you remember, the world of football, it was devastating because we didn't have any matches. Obviously, revenues were going to be heavily impacted, which meant budgets got impacted. So, of course, as a chief transformation officer going into an organization looking to run a broad transformation, it's pretty much the worst environment you can kind of be faced with. And so that limited some of the options that we may have had otherwise. But what it did do was it forced us to kind of do this as a little bit more grassroots, really build it from the inside out. And that was an amazing opportunity. So we literally, with the leadership team, we developed that strategy, a strategy and a vision and a mission that we could all could buy into. And it looked at different aspects. It wasn't just about, what's the new technology or how we're going to grow the different revenue areas, but it was also cultural. Like, what's the type of culture that we want to build together? What are the principles around that culture? And we did have a number of principles that were part of what we called the digital revolution. And, first and foremost at that was fan obsession. And it sounds like it could be a bit of a throwaway term, but for us, it was actually something that we wanted to be very core to everything we did. And I'm taking a leaf out of the book of Amazon, AWS, obviously, because Amazon is famous for their customer-centric approach to business, but we did want to bring that type of culture into the different initiatives that we were going to be running. So what that really means is, as we're looking at something like the mobile app for the club or a new website or building out a streaming platform, we always wanted to make sure we were looking at what is the value that we're creating for our fans first and foremost. Because if we can create value for our fans, then we can create a commercial business around it. And quite often, not just in football, but in business, generally speaking, so often that simple concept is not well understood. And, and so if you're not creating value for your fans, you're not going to be able to monetize them. And that's always the conversation that seems to fly around football. How do you monetize fans? And I've never been a big fan of that term of monetizing fans. I'm more a
Yeah.
fan of the term like to create value for fans. If you can create value that's real, then fans will pay you for that. So that, that was a core part of sort of the
That's an interesting one, because you have a lot of people that comes, especially to football clubs or to sport properties, saying we're going to turn fans into customer.
Right.
And I think that's the most common mistake that you have when you see this kind of pitch, because a fan is not really a customer.
I mean, that's a really interesting topic, right? So is a fan a customer? I mean, if, in a sense, a fan is a customer in some ways, but I think you're hitting on a really interesting point, that a fan is not a typical customer of a typical business or a typical brand. And understanding that is really important. Like football businesses, even though they're brands, they work very differently to typical commercial brands. And just even looking at it from a structural standpoint, in terms of a business structure, we're getting maybe into some boring details, but I mean, if you look at things like operating margins, if you look at the ability to reinvest profits back into your business growth, these are basic tenets of most businesses that typically don't happen as much in a football club, because like we said before, a lot of that capital usually tends to get reallocated back to the pitch. So you have to think very carefully about what it is you're trying to create for your fans. If you're going to think of them as a customer, in which they are a customer in some aspects. And for example, they will be a customer of your online store, for example, but you have to continue to think of them as fans. And so for us, that meant building a very broad strategy, sort of a very integrated digital strategy. And at the very top of that was what we called our Madridista community. And so something we can get into later, but loyalty is another term that is very much being talked about now in the world of football. Clubs want to build out their sort of membership or their loyalty programs, particularly as they're making a shift towards kind of a more direct consumer approach. And for us, that was kind of almost the tip of the pyramid, the tip of the spear. How do we create a great narrative, storytelling, communication, community building, that with that community, then we can build value together, we can build businesses together. And so it has to be a very integrated strategy across the whole business.
And what areas of the business were you integrating into that Madridista membership program that you were building? Because I remember I started my career at Real Madrid, as we were discussing before, and I remember at the time the Madridista community was essentially not giving much value to fans. And one of the things that attracted me more was when I was talking to the person that was responsible for the Madridista program and the club. He told me that the number one benefit that people value most was the ID, the Madridista ID. So being able to show to the friends that they had a Madridista ID. But, that was a time that was 12 years ago already, something. So a time where you didn't have all these digital platforms that allow you to give more services and more options for fans.
I mean, it also points to the fact of how much the world of football has changed over the last 20 years. So, I mean, first of all, the Madridista loyalty program, the Carne Madridista, from the numbers that I've seen based on the research we've done, has been one of the most successful loyalty programs of any of the major football clubs. So, I mean, the person, your ex-colleague that you're mentioning, I mean, did an incredible job of founding that program. And the program was founded on a model that made a lot of sense at the time. But it was a model that inherently was more of a local model. So, of course, for loyal fans in Madrid, particularly fans that don't have the ability to potentially be a socio, for example. So in Madrid, it's unlike most of the other places of the world, you could be a socio of the club. And that means a huge amount in Madrid. And I think that possibly, unless you're a long-term fan of Real Madrid as a club, for people outside Madrid, they may not really internalize the significance that has. So if you're not a socio of the club, then being a Madridista is really the next best thing you could do. And so having that card like you say, actually, it's not wrong, is the fact that based on the research, it was the most valued item of being a carne madridista holder is to actually have that physical card. And that was something that came up in the research that we did, because essentially what we needed to do was extend that idea to a global fan community, because now, that program was launched over 20 years ago. And so now in those 20 years, Real Madrid as a club, as a brand, as an audience, I mean, throughout that time, we've had the rise of social media. Social media has created enormous reach. So now we're a very, very global audience. In fact, 1% of the fan base more or less lives inside of Madrid, as opposed to the 99% of people following the club from outside. So the question is, how can you create that value for an international market that doesn't have the ability to go to the stadium, that doesn't have the ability to engage in the club in such a close proximity as local fans. And so, for example, a lot of the other value of that program were things like discounts in local stores. Of course, expanding that program can be difficult if you want to do it at an international level. So we kind of rethought that model around the concept, not so much of loyalty, but as more around community. And so thinking about it as a global community, because at the end of the day, you can go anywhere in the world more or less, and you'll see people wearing Real Madrid jerseys.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is a kinship that is, you're literally wearing your identity on the sleeve. So that idea of identity is something that's really critical to that fan engagement. It's like, what does that identity mean to you as a fan? It's not just as a fan either. It's actually as a person. Your club that you're following actually is a part of your integrated identity as a person. So what we really were trying to do was build a narrative, build a story, build a community. What does that sense of belonging mean to you? How can we sort of move higher up that Maslow's hierarchy into kind of more self-actualization, and kind of looking at how do we connect fans together, not just connect fans to the club.
Mm-hmm.
So it was sort of really looking at it from a different model. And then on top of that, we have to build value that is relevant for international fans. And so that's where things like building streaming platforms are in play, building memorabilia platforms, building new digital businesses that have reach and have value for international fans, and then integrating across all of those different things into that fan community. So it's a combination of a lot of different things. And I mean, I think that it's still at the beginning, and I've obviously left the club now, and the team that's there has got an amazing roadmap that they're going to continue to build on. But that concept is about how do you build that global community.
And I think one of the ultimate goals has been how to build more first-party data and for the club. And now there's a big discussion about, especially with the numbers that you have on social media, that at the end give you huge reach, but you don't really own that data, and you don't really know who your fan is. You can activate and you can work on that data, but ultimately it belongs to the platform.
Yeah.
And there's an increasing discussion in general in the sport industry on how you can increase that first party data and build your database and be able to know who your fans are and how they behave. I imagine that was one of the ultimate goals that you had, no?
Well, there is a lot of talk around first party data, although I'd say that conversation is, now it's probably more mature. I would say that within the industry, that conversation around first party data was still maturing at the time that I joined the club. So you have obviously in every organization, you have different levels of awareness of different things. So you've got incredibly smart people in these organizations. And so within the organizations, there's a high awareness, but sometimes it can be challenging to get that awareness to a level where you can get the entire senior management bought into a concept. So we evolved a lot over the story of where the value of data is. And data has become obviously more and more important in the world of sports. And it's important for a number of reasons. It's not just about having first-party data. It's about really, why do you want to have first-party data? What are you going to do with that first-party data? So in order to be able to do something with that first-party data, you need to actually have a direct connection with the owners of that data. So that means actually running your e-commerce business, or having, this Madridista community. I mean, you actually need to build connections with your fans. And ironically, that's something that has not happened so much in the world of football over the last 20 years. And there's good reasons behind that, because a lot of these businesses can be quite complex to run. I mean, they require more technical expertise. They require lower operating margins, like we said before. They require more investment. There's more risk involved in them. And if you look at that compared to, say, sort of the more traditional businesses in a football club, you've got your broadcast rights, which typically are negotiated on your behalf. You've got stadium receipts, which depends a lot, obviously, on the success of your team, but also on the location of your stadium and the size of the stadium and all of that. But it's a fixed capacity asset. So, you can only fit a certain number of people. You can only hold a certain number of events. And of course, there's a big trend right now in renovating stadiums. The Bernabeu has just been renovated. So of course, that's an opportunity to create new revenues. But then you've got your sponsorship business, which is another key revenue pillar. Sponsorship's a great business because it's relatively little overhead. It's very high margin. You're essentially able to monetize the value of your brand. And so it's a very low risk, because contracts typically have a 4 to 5 to 6 year duration. So it's a great model. But once you start to get to something like e-commerce, licensing, some of these other businesses that have typically been a little bit more complicated, they've been outsourced in the past. And those are also the businesses that tend to have the direct connection with your fans. So if you think about a typical fan, they probably buy their jersey through a sports retailer. They watch the match through a broadcaster. All the touch points that they have with their club are through intermediaries. So there hasn't been the ability to actually directly know your fan. And internally, the conversation's changed over the last years. In sponsorship, for example, brands are not just throwing money at getting their brands plastered on a billboard somewhere. I mean, they are more sophisticated themselves. They want to know who the audiences they're speaking to. And so this has forced clubs to start to say, well, hang on a second, we need to know our fans better. So the first thing is you start to try and collect first-party data, but then you very quickly realize that collecting first-party data is very difficult if you don't have any value to offer. Hence, this sort of strategy of trying to move to a more direct-to-consumer, building value for your fans, building out an online store or integrating e-commerce opportunities into the rest of your business, giving reasons for fans to come to you so that they will share their data with you. And I mean, we talk about first-party data, but you can also talk about zero-party data as this sort of idea of really exchanging data for value. So, that gets into more, you could say, more complicated or more exciting opportunities around things like community engagement, building gamification models into it where there is a real value exchange of data. Like, I'm going to get more, the more I share, the more I get out of the program. And obviously on the other side, the more data the club is getting willingly from the fans. So I mean, that's become like a big business, and that was a core part of our strategy, was really around that.
And how you solve one of the main challenges that I see in many sport properties is that you have your ticketing platform, you have your e-commerce, that's just it. You have the broadcaster that is broadcasting your game, so you don't have a direct conversation with that. You have social media, but all these different sources of data are kind of stuck in different buckets. Mm-hmm. How did you solve the backend structure to make it unify and make that all this data that was coming from different feeds were in the same place and was kind of actionable?
Well, I mean, you obviously can't completely reinvent everything, but a core part of our approach was really around the concept of sort of real-time data in, real-time data analysis and processing, and real-time activation. So what does that mean? It means our goal was to have the ability to, no matter which channel a fan was coming to us through, whether it be through the ticketing channels, through obviously not through social media because we don't have the direct access to it, but through any owned and operated channels, we wanted to be able to collect that data in real time. And that includes offline experiences as well. So if they're doing something in the stadium, or if they're scanning tickets, if they're purchasing in the concessions, or if they're purchasing in the retail store, all of that data we want to be able to collect in real time. That all then needs to go into a customer data platform. And so for that, we partnered with Adobe. So we did a partnership with Adobe that has been an incredible partnership, and they've been great partners. And part of that was leveraging their real-time CDP. And then that gave us the ability to then design real-time fan journeys that essentially allow us to orchestrate different activations that can happen in the moment. So the big idea there is really shifting from the idea of collecting data and activating it at a later time. So for example, through bulk emails, things like that, which are really becoming less effective, to being able to activate in the moment of the decision of the customer, of the fan. So, can we send a notification? Can we send a promotion? Can we send a message or activate that customer in the store in the moment? Or can we use that data to send it to the salesperson, for example, to have information about the customer that they can use to help complete a transaction? But really trying to capture that moment when it's the moment of the intent, as opposed to sometime later where it may be too late, or you're trying to vie for attention amongst all the other communications that you're receiving.
And how will this strategy play out? Because you're talking a lot about the direct business that you were building, like e-commerce, like the shop, like the offline experiences, ticketing, etc. But how were you using all these for the sponsors, and how was all this brought into your sponsorship propositions?
Well, I mean, as I mentioned before, I mean, the sponsor conversations typically nowadays are leaning more into the sort of the digital activation. So there's a lot of interest in being able to activate content through social media channels. But also, I think more experiential activations are becoming more interesting. I think essentially anything where the brand, one of the things that starts to become possible with the approach that we took by having these customer data platforms is to be able to actually look at data sharing opportunities that are obviously GDPR compliant, where you can match personas and profiles. So, for example, if a sponsor like BMW had a particular persona or a particular profile that they were trying to target, we can now use the data that we've been collecting from our fans that they've given us permission for to match those profiles and run more targeted campaigns. So that's a level of sophistication that didn't really exist until the relatively recent years. I mean, it's not that it didn't exist outside the world of sports, but it's something that's becoming a lot more prevalent and a lot more desired. So like any business, I mean, you have to be competitive. So of course, there's a certain premium and a certain advantage to being a club like Real Madrid when it comes to engaging sponsors, but you still need to be competitive in the market. You're still competing with other clubs, other brands that those sponsors could go to. So the more capabilities you can provide, the better. And I happen to have had some conversations with people on the other side of that sponsorship conversation recently, who recently did a large sponsorship with the club. And it was just incredible to hear the sort of the positive response that they'd had from engaging with the Real Madrid sponsorship team for things like the speed that activation could happen, the types of activations that the club could do. And a lot of that is kind of testament to sort of the infrastructure that was sort of put in place, the ability to create high quality content, the ability to activate across a multitude of channels. So yeah, that's becoming really attractive to sponsors.
Yeah, especially because I think you speed up a lot the process of reaching your target audience. If you think about BMW, if they don't sponsor Real Madrid, they need to go to the creative agency to come up with the idea. Then they need to produce the pieces of content that they're going to use, like TV ads or whatever. And then they have to pay a lot of money to essentially get that content distributed. When you partner with the club, you essentially are doing all this process into the first time, because the club will give you the distribution through their channel. They will work on the creatives because they will integrate your brand into their content, and it's kind of speed up all this process for brands. I think that's the biggest advantage that you have when sponsoring with a brand like Real Madrid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we wanted to do was really excel at media and entertainment in terms of from content generation. So that was important not just for growing social media, but it was also important because we deployed the RM Play platform, and the RM Play platform has an amazing selection of original content that's produced by the club around storytelling. And I mean, that's testament to the amazing team that's there. Francois, the chief content officer who came into the club to lead that team. I mean, they've really created an excellence around media and content generation and great storytelling. In fact, you probably would have seen the 3-part documentary that came out on Apple TV Plus, and so there's storytelling is so important in audience engagement. And I think the the numbers that the club has been able to achieve, obviously historically, I mean, it's always been growth. So it's not like, this is one of the things that's sort of important to sort of understand, I guess, is that a transformation is, I would certainly never claim to be the person that did the transformation. I mean, what I can do is help to bring a group of different people together, but the talent is all in the club. And so as much as anything, it's often just about unlocking the talent in all the different areas of the club and letting people do their best work. And sometimes that can just be, normal everyday things that can get in the way. So a big part of what we did was kind of an agile transformation, trying to get cross-functional teams working together, try and create different processes, work processes, and just unlocking all the talent that exists in the club. And there's some amazing talent that is creating videographers, editors that are creating great talent. And so, as much as that, we just wanted to get all of that out.
Yeah. And taking one step back on your career, you were one of the key persons at the AR and VR strategy at HP. And I have the luck when I was at Meta to be very close to this type of technologies. I remember the first time I tried the Oculus, and I've had the feeling of, this is going to be 100% the future of entertainment. How do you see VR and AR playing in the sport world? I know it's a complicated and wide questions, but I really believe that the future of entertainment it's with VR and sports, just because it's such an experiential content, will have one of the key pivotal roles in the development of this technology.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot in that, right? So, I mean, I've been in that space. I mean, a lot of people now have seen the Apple Vision Pro, and that may be their first entry into the kind of world of what's now being referred to as spatial computing. Historically, has been referred to as mixed reality or augmented reality, virtual reality. There's been a whole argument over the years of what that is. For others, maybe, the Quest from Meta was like their first foray into sort of virtual reality. I mean, but it really goes back decades and decades. I mean, virtual reality has been a technology that's essentially kind of come and gone from fashion at different moments. For some people, they may remember the virtual reality headsets from, I think it was the 1980s or 1990s, that were these giant CRT monitors that were strapped to your head. And I mean, it was like the bleeding edge of technology at the time, and it was the future, and everyone was going to live in these virtual realities. And it never came to pass. And then, where I kind of got more engaged into it was during, I think it was around 2012-ish, 2011 probably, when the Oculus, which was the company that got acquired by Meta, the Oculus DK1, the developer kit 1 came out. And so for me, it was mind-blowing. I mean, it was mind-blowing for everyone that saw that technology at the time. And the technology has only got better, because if anyone remembers the Oculus DK1 compared to what we have today with the Quest 3 and the to be honest, I have to admit, I haven't yet tried the Vision Pro. I need to try it. But,
yeah, me neither. But
it
has to be amazing.
It's going to be amazing. So, I mean, we're talking about low resolution screens, what was called screen door effect, where you could literally see the gaps between the pixels in the screens. I mean, it was pretty horrible, but it showed a future that was really exciting. And I was also working at a company at the time where we had a piece of technology that was blowing people's minds, and it was like the darling of Silicon Valley. It was a company called Leap Motion, and we were kind of termed to be sort of the Minority Report come to real life. And for anyone that remembers Minority Report with Tom Cruise, he was, controlling his computer with his hands, and it was all gesture based, and that was supposed to be the future of computing. And so everyone was really excited because the technology we created could map your hands and fingers in virtual space and 3D and really high accuracy, really low latency, and which of course now is technology that's embedded into these virtual reality headsets. But at the time, it was very novel. And so one of the use cases that I was really passionate about at the time was to marry that sensor with the Oculus developer kit. And so it was the first time that you could see your hands in a virtual reality environment. And it was, what we were doing was we were using the sensor on the front of the headset, and the sensor had two cameras. So we were actually doing pass-through virtual reality back in 2011, 2012. And it was mind-blowing because you could have virtual objects that floated without gravity, and you could touch them and you could control them. And I mean, it was phenomenal. Unfortunately, I believe there was a bit of a falling out between the founder of our company and Palmer Luckey at the time. However, the founder of our company has now gone on to create Midjourney. So Midjourney AI, which is one of the new generative AI, incredible guy, very, 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 very bright, genius level technical founder. So I got into that space quite early on, and I was a real fan of it for sure. I spent a lot of time on that as well while I was at HP, and that was really more looking at, okay, consumers come, where's the enterprise play for virtual reality? And it was really interesting because it seems obvious now, but at the time, HP had a very close relationship with Intel because of the chipsets, and very close relationship with Microsoft because of Windows. And I remember being on a call and they were laying out a strategy for virtual reality across the devices that were going to come. And they had low, medium, and high end headsets that connected to a PC. And they had a couple of headsets that you could put your phone in, similar to the Gear VR, if you remember that. And I was saying on the call, but there's no fully integrated like mobile chipset. Like the future is going to be mobile headsets that are fully integrated. I mean, none of this is going to work. I mean, everyone's going to want a device that you can just basically pick up off your coffee table and put on. And it was really funny because no one from Intel or Microsoft would agree that was the way. And it really was a testament to the fact that Intel didn't make mobile chipsets. And at the time, their main competitor was doing mobile chipsets. So they're basically their own sort of infrastructure kind of got in the way of them from being a competitor at that. And in the end, Oculus went the way of Meta went the way of mobile headsets. And so now the Quest 3 is that format. And that's pretty much the only format. So we were, one of the lessons that I've kind of learned along the way, particularly with Leap Motion and virtual reality, is these technologies that seem really cool, you have to understand where they are on the Gartner hype cycle kind of curve. You've got the trough of disillusionment, and you've got this kind of long run up towards broad adoption. But the problem is, if there isn't a clear use case, if there isn't, it has to be a number of factors that need to work for broad adoption. So where I am right now on virtual reality is that I think the Quest 3 is an amazing device. I think that the Vision Pro is an amazing device. The problem is there's still some barriers that are difficult to overcome. First of all, Apple's done what they can to try and create a social experience by having the pass-through. I was always a big believer that pass-through was necessary. In fact, we looked at the company that Apple acquired to acquire that technology while I was at HP. And the guy, if you haven't ever, you need to hear an interview with him, Bertrand. He's just an incredible guy, super chill, Canadian, just created some of the best technology that is now powering the Apple Vision Pro. But just the mere fact of, simple things like the Quest, was it the Quest 2 or the Quest 1? You had to always charge it, because if you didn't charge it frequently enough, it wouldn't have enough battery. So you couldn't just leave it on the coffee table. It was a dedicated decision to take it out of the cupboard. And that small barrier creates enough of a barrier to stop broad adoption. Initially it was thought there wasn't enough content, but then Meta sort of solved that. They got lots and lots of content. It's just still a matter that there is a barrier to putting something on your face. And that could be a barrier that is potentially too hard to overcome with today's technology. I could be wrong about that. Apple's obviously doing a big bet on spatial computing. I think they've taken the right approach with the fact that they're not trying to change the entire way that you interface with technology. They're essentially trying to put something that you're comfortable with into your 3D environment. But again, there is a barrier to putting on that headset. And for mass market adoption, that could be challenging. But I think if you look at any of Apple's products over the history, it's taken them quite a few generations to get right. You look at the Apple Watch, it's probably taken them at least 7 generations to get the Apple Watch to a point that it's got really, really broad market penetration. Even the iPhone has taken many, many, many generations to get to the point that it got to. And I think that they're going to need to take a number of generations. I mean, something like the Vision Pro, I think we need to see the Vision Pro version 5, version 6, which presumably will be much, much simpler form factor, new technologies in the display. The big thing that worries me about that technology is that some of the technologies that are required to create the ultimate experience haven't yet been invented, and there isn't a clear path to how they can be invented. So for example, great, project it into your retina, have a very lightweight pair of glasses, but we don't have the technology to do that yet. And there isn't a clear path to do that. So for that reason, I've always been a bit hesitant to invest heavily into virtual reality experiences. They're great, but when you're talking about hundreds of millions of people in your audience, you need to invest in technologies that are going to get broad reach. And just the small penetration of devices in the market is a big barrier to make that investment.
Yeah, but at the same time, you need to be kind of ready or try to find a way to be ready, because if you don't invest at the beginning, then when the technology becomes adopted and available, you're kind of on your back foot. So
yeah, I mean, I think you need to look at where you sit in the value chain. So, as a football club, is there a first mover advantage? Maybe, but I mean, for example, take NextVR. NextVR was a company that acquired the 360 video immersive rights for NBA and went bankrupt. Now, arguably, maybe they were too early. I think they actually got bought by Apple, possibly, but it just wasn't appealing enough, even with the match footage, to capture that market. So they were early mover. It didn't work for them. That's not to say that it won't ever work, but if I were to look at it from the position of being an early adopter in the hardware game, absolutely, you need many generations of creating new models to perfect the technology. So absolutely, if you're going to be producing content for a new format, it's hard to see that there's a huge first mover advantage there. There's probably some brand uplift if you get a lot of people on it, but then again, you've got the limit of devices. So even if you create an amazing piece of technology, maybe you get some articles written about how you're really innovative and how you're the first to create this new immersive content. There's not so many people who are going to see it, so it's some good exposure, some good earned media. But beyond that, it's not clear that there's a huge advantage. So, I think it's always a difficult decision, because you want to create experiences, you want to create these great experiences, but obviously, like in all business, you have to take decisions about where to allocate your budget.
Yeah. But now I believe, and I'm a big believer of VR and AR in general. And I think, as I said, I think it's the future of entertaining. Now we're starting to get to a point where the production cost of the VR content, it's going down, and you have companies like Stadium that are broadcasting a lot of live sports game. And I really believe, and I really think that VR is the perfect experience in between the stadium experience and the TV broadcast. Because the big problem that I see with VR and a lot of people that are skeptical about it is that in general they think that it's a substitution. So if they think that consumers in general will say, okay, I have the VR headset, so I will not go to the stadium. But I don't think that's true, because nothing is going to substitute the experience of going to the stadium.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I also agree that it could be a use case that breaks open the world of immersive viewing. Because I think in like everything, and I think we're at this really interesting point in time. I mean, arguably we've been at this moment in time every year, but we are at an interesting moment where you've got this very, very rapid development of large AI models, generative content, generative 3D content now, generative photorealistic content. Computer vision technologies have now got so good that it's a relatively solved problem now to do complete 3D modeling in real time of a physical venue. So there's a lot of different technologies that are coming together. And I think the perfect marriage of a number of these technologies with something like the Vision Pro headset could create that experience you're talking about. And if you nail it, that can be the tipping point. I mean, if you make it that it's just the thing that you're going to do on a Friday night or Saturday night is sit on your sofa with all your mates sitting on their sofas. You're all watching it together. It's a social experience. You've got this incredible kind of view that's better than you're going to get from your TV. Plus, you've got all the ancillary stuff. You've got 3D replays that are in 3D. I mean, you know, if you can create that experience, that can be the tipping point. And then that's the great thing. I mean, it's like cell phones, right? I mean, once upon a time, like way back in the day, I mean, I remember the term yuppie. I mean, yuppie was a young, I can't remember what the term stood for, but it was like basically a young show-off professional that had too much money and wanted people to see that they had lots of money. So they bought one of these cell phones, and I mean, it had no practical value, and, you know, and who cares? But then it arrived at a moment that, you know, that guy on Sunday got the call from the partner at the firm or the boss, and you didn't have the phone, and all of a sudden you were disadvantaged. So, you know, that social effect where, hey, if all my mates are watching this and they've all got headsets, of course I'm going to get a headset. So there has to be that kind of mechanic at play. And I think once that experience happens, and it could be in sports, you could see a huge network effect where all of a sudden it makes sense to go buy one of these headsets. And of course, we're still early days. I mean, the Apple Vision Pro headsets are what, €3,000. Probably we're going to see I don't know, maybe there's going to be a €1,500 headset there's going to be a Pro, and there's going to be, I don't know. I don't think the price is going to come down so much with Apple, but, you know, it'll probably be equivalent pricing, I imagine, to kind of a MacBook. And so it's within the reach of a lot of people to go buy one of those headsets at that point. And if there's a reason, i.e. your friends are using it, then you're going to go buy one.
Yeah, that's that network effect.
And that's when the takeoff happens.
Yeah, and especially I think sports has the power to become one of the key content that
social.
Will make
it's very social.
that will make this network effect and that tipping point.
Yeah.
And
I think also you saw that in gaming. I mean, gaming, you know, when I grew up, gaming was less social, I would say. I mean, you had network, but it was more like if you wanted to play a multiplayer game, you played it on a local LAN, and you played it with your friends on computers that were connected to the same LAN.
Or sharing physically the same space with your screen split, which was a horrible experience.
Exactly. So, I mean, you know, obviously today it's highly social. You've got your headset, you can talk to your friends. And because of that, the business of gaming PCs just exploded. I mean, when I was at HP, that business within a couple of years went from zero to like multi-billions. I mean, it was crazy in a category of product that was low margin, really hard business to be in. I mean, you're just making boxes to suddenly becoming like a desirable high margin luxury product. And the business went through the roof because of that social aspect, because gaming became a social thing. It's the thing that you do with your friends.
Yeah, and also interoperability between devices, because if you think about Fortnite, for example, it doesn't matter if you're playing on your phone, on your computer, or on your PlayStation or Xbox. Everyone shares the same experience, and the experience adapts to the device you're playing with. And I think that has to come to virtual reality as well.
Well, and that's an interesting point, because I mean, Fortnite, everyone's been talking about the metaverse, and I mean, metaverse as a term, you know, there was that sort of was a couple of years back. I mean, metaverse was the term, and Web3 was the term, and I don't think any of those things have gone away. You know, probably there was a few people that got a bit burned by it, so the sort of the vernacular has gone down a little bit. But everyone was talking about metaverse. Everyone was trying to build the next metaverse. But I mean, if you look around, I mean, there's two metaverses really. You've got Roblox and you've got Fortnite. I mean, these are two amazing. Well, and arguably you could say Minecraft, I guess, as well. But I mean, just take Fortnite. I mean, the Disney Fortnite deal is just phenomenal. I mean, you've got some of the best IP, most recognizable IP in the world that's coming to this virtual universe that you can you can dress like, you can change your avatars, you can see characters, you can create stories. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that you can do basically living in that world with your friends, leveraging your favorite IP. I mean, that's insane. And as soon as you bring that to a virtual reality experience where you can really be immersed into it, I mean, I think that can be also another point that becomes a bit of a tipping point.
Yeah, and also the other experiences that we've seen in Fortnite with the concert that Travis Scott
Yeah.
did, and
Well, that speaks to the fact of it being a metaverse and not just a game. I mean, people are hanging out in that environment, not just to play the game, but to
just
share
hang out. Yeah.
experiences. And yeah.
No, it's interesting, and it will be interesting to see how sports properties can get into this type of experiences that exist already, or develop their own experiences, which is also one of the areas where I see more growth and opportunities.
Well, yeah, so that raises kind of an interesting question because right now we're in this sort of period where most of the major clubs, at least, and I'd say most of the smaller clubs as well, are trying to build these communities of fans, trying to build these direct to consumer businesses. And I think there's a big question that, in the past, these businesses have been outsourced. There has been a bit of a shift in the market. Like you're seeing a big shift away from Fanatics, for example, being the sort of the rights holder of a lot of the merchandising, licensing, etc. They've been typically running the e-commerce stores, and a lot of clubs have not really been happy with the way those businesses have been run. And Fanatics does very well as a business. They're a huge valuation. They're doing amazing in the US, but arguably the international part of the business has fallen away a bit. And so clubs, big clubs particularly, know that they have valuable brands. They know that they need to grow their audiences. They want to be more connected to it. And so operating through an intermediary in that way is no longer the way that they want to do it. So the question is, what do you do? Do you do it yourself or do you find someone else? And there's not a lot of options in the market. And so it's a bit of a tricky time. And a lot of people in a lot of clubs are thinking right now about what is the right approach. We've just seen Man U do a deal with Scale. Well, the problem is in the world of football, it can be a very unpredictable environment. You can have incredible success on the pitch one year and generate enormous revenues through Champions League. And then the next year, maybe you have poor performance. And so the difference in revenues year to year can be substantial, which also means that from a planning perspective, you tend to be fairly conservative with your budgeting. So if you're looking at growing out a direct consumer business, my worry is going to be that for some of the clubs, even some of the biggest clubs, in the long term, maintaining a discipline of continuing to invest and potentially increase your investment into the development of that business is going to be difficult. And so it could be that there's an opportunity for a new model where it's, I think there's an external support, external infrastructure that might be needed to support these sports brands, but maybe done in a way that is a little bit more closely aligned to the brand values, aligned to the growth of the brand, the growth of the audience. And that's not typically just running a store. That may be there may be more aspects that they need support with. But it is, I see it that it could be difficult in the long run to get to big scale around something like e-commerce, because e-commerce typically is it's a high volume business. If you want to, you can obviously work with logistics partners, but if you want to have warehousing means that you need to have high volume to justify the investment. And so if every club is doing that on an individual basis, it may not make economical sense. And so it may be that we're at a point in the growth of the industry where new models need to emerge that provide that infrastructure, that allow the clubs to scale these more complex businesses, that allow them to develop these direct-to-consumer businesses, but without having to do all the internal investment and heavy lifting themselves. Because Man U, I wish them all the success, but there's very few clubs that are the size of Manchester United. So for the rest of the clubs that are also wanting to take these initiatives, there's not a great deal of opportunity in the market right now for where they can find that support.
Yeah, and I think that has been a little bit the evolution of the industry, where you were talking about it, that everything was through an intermediary. So basically, the sport industry was about transferring the risk to someone, whether it was the broadcaster with the media rights, fanatics with the e-commerce. At the end, the clubs were very focused on the sports side and not developing so much their business sides. The industry is evolving to a place where the risk cannot be transferred 100% to a third party.
Because the problem with transferring risk is that who takes the risk captures the value. So it's very difficult to have someone else take the risk and for you to capture all the value.
Absolutely,
so finding business models that have better alignment, let's say, and this is not to necessarily put fault to Fanatics, but Fanatics' model more or less is to manage a portfolio of assets. They have a number of different IPs from a number of different teams, and so they have a platform that they want to sell in high volume, and collectively the aggregate value of that IP is what helps to create that. That's where they capture value. But for them, their incentive is not to maximize the value of any one individual IP or team within that portfolio. And so that runs counter to the goals of the individual brands. So if you're a league like NFL, where it's more of a league structure, that may make more sense because you kind of want to lift the value of the league. Whereas in European football and other European sports, it's different. So you've got individual clubs that have individual brands and individual businesses, and a model where it's about portfolio maximization may not make the most sense. And so trying to find partners that can have aligned business objectives where there can be either investment or co-investment, but in a way where there is a good share of value and also sharing of data, sharing of brand IP, brand values, all these sorts of things. So you need to really align those models, but with a partner that can scale. Because if you look at a typical retail brand, they could be in the order of 1,000 to 4,000 people working in that organization. There's very few football clubs that are willing to scale that size of headcount. So, when you start looking at creating global commerce businesses, you need to start thinking about things like regional offices and regional marketing teams. And, all of that infrastructure that's required is very unattractive to the model of a football club.
Yeah. And also the amount of products that you need to develop, because you're going to compare yourself with...
And all of those products, all of that development, all of it is risk. You're taking risk in investing in a new product because you don't know if it's going to sell. You're taking risk in manufacturing that product because it could sit in your warehouses and cost you money. I mean, there's a lot of additional risk that comes with that. And that's all risk that is away from the pitch. None of that risk helps you. If that pays off, none of that helps you win more matches.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to really embrace that type of risk in the football business.
And kind of to sum up all our conversation, and this is a question that I always ask to all the people that come to the podcast, is like, where do you see the biggest challenges at the moment on the sport industry, and where you see the biggest opportunities at the same time?
The biggest challenges and the biggest opportunities. Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges, at least in the world of football, but I think it's more broadly speaking across sports, many different sports, is what we've been talking about. It's how to scale the commercial business because these are becoming more sophisticated businesses. Brands have transitioned to being more direct to consumer. And with all of this becomes, all these complexities that we've talked about. And I mean, okay, it's one thing being a Real Madrid or a Manchester United. These are larger clubs, but for some of these clubs, they don't have the people internally to be able to manage these projects. So that is a challenge because, of course, as we've already seen, this creates larger and larger gaps. That can mean that leagues become less competitive. I think there is also a challenge right now where there's a bit of there's a lot of conversation that happens around the broadcast rights and the model of distribution for broadcast. And there's sort of people that are on the fence saying that we should move direct to consumer. And there are others that are saying that no, the best way to maximize rights are as the traditional method. I mean, I think that we're in a difficult moment where you've got this generational overlap where there's this conversation about engaging a new generation of fans and the need to continue to engage your existing generations of fans. There's two very, very, well, not just two, but many different profiles, including where you consume content, how you consume content. And so sports in some ways kind of stuck in this middle ground where it doesn't kind of know exactly which way to go. And then, of course, you've got technical challenges that go along with that. I mean, the recent Super League announcement talked about a platform for direct-to-consumer streaming. Obviously, streaming platforms have become very popular, Netflix and HBO and all of these streaming platforms, but these are all on-demand services. And so once you start to get into live streaming, is particularly with sports, with the level of popularity that sports like football have, you start to get into very, very complicated architectural challenges of being able to deliver simultaneous streams. And so to do that requires the sort of expertise of a Meta or a YouTube or a Google or an AWS. So, now you're going from the world of sports into the world of being a leading technology company. So this is probably something that will play out over the next few years, and it'll be interesting to see which way it shifts. But that's definitely not an easy problem to solve. In terms of where the opportunities are, I would love to see a shift more to a direct-to-consumer model. I think that there is an opportunity. In fact, I thought it was a very interesting proposal. Obviously, it's a highly political topic, the Super League, but at the very least, as a thought experiment, the idea of a global streaming platform to serve global sports rights does open up the possibility of doing some very, very interesting things in terms of actually what the product that you deliver is. And I think that's when you can start to innovate on the product of sport. And the product of sport, if you're talking about traditional sports, hasn't really innovated that much in the actual delivery of sports itself.
Yeah.
You've had some, augmented graphics and some digital overlays, virtual overlays for advertising, things like that. But the actual sport is still more or less the same linear format that it's always been. And once you start to go to streaming platforms, you start to see some interesting innovation. I mean, we've seen some innovation around Formula One with F1 TV, the ability to immediately go into whichever car you want to follow because you've got live streams coming from every car. You've got the ability to interact with the data that's coming off that. PGA Tour did some interesting work with streaming, being able to essentially you could follow any golfer you wanted. You've got all of the telemetry data from the ball. So, once you start to get into a streaming platform or a direct consumer approach for delivering sports, you can start to really innovate on the product. I think that's something I'd love to see happen more in sports. And I think it would also solve a lot of these questions that tend to rise up of how do we engage a younger generation? Well, it's not going to be through continuing to roll out traditional broadcast media deals, most likely.
Now, I think like, for me, the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity is personalization. If you think about what you were mentioning, if you look at how people consume live sport content at the moment, if you watch it on TV, it doesn't matter if you are 60 years old or if you are 20 years old, you all have the same experience. Even from an advertising point of view, there's no personalization. So in a world where everything is personalized, the content you see on social media is personalized, the advertising you see is personalized. Sports in general are not personalized.
Well, it's not just that it's not personalized, it's almost the complete opposite. So I mean, if you think about how you consume most of your content through your Instagram feed or a TikTok feed or YouTube feed, I mean, it's all being, as you say, personalized, but it's all being curated as well. And sports couldn't be further from the opposite. It's actually difficult to find the content often because either it's been sold to multiple different broadcasters, or it's not available in your region, or it's not available on the subscription that you have. It's available on another one. I mean, it couldn't be more difficult to find. But part of that is owing to the broadcast rights model, because if, for example, you wanted to come along and say, I'm going to buy the global exclusive rights for a sport, it's very difficult to do that because they're typically sold on different schedules for renewal. It's very difficult to actually go and own those rights. And it's been interesting to see what Apple's done with the MLS. I mean, it's more or less the only global exclusive rights sort of that's been distributed direct to consumer. Arguably, they haven't done a lot with it yet. It'd be interesting to see if they do something in the future. I'm sure it's just a test bed for them. But yeah, once you've got that direct to consumer connection, you're serving it directly to the end user, then you've got the ability to build this level of personalization, level of curation, aggregation, being able to really deliver people the content they want to see. I mean, that is what I'm talking about when I say sort of the innovation around the product of sport.
Yeah, 100%. I think the opportunities around going direct to consumer in sport are enormous because there's very few content formats that can bring people together the way sport does it, and that's where the power of sports relies, and I think where there's more potential to find new business model. The challenge will be in this transition time. Have you moved from a very secure all media rights traditional model where you essentially have secure revenue for the next and visibility on the revenue you're going to get for the next 3-4 years to a model where you will need to reinvest into your business, not only think about the in-pitch performance, but also think about all the different business models that are around the sport. So it's going to be interesting times for sure.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Michael, for joining
Kike.
us. It has been really a pleasure and a very insightful conversation, and I hope to make another episode to keep up with what you're doing.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.